All right. So, Coach, we're going to let this room populate a little bit. We're starting to get a bunch of people in there. So as you guys out there are joining us, I want to welcome you. I'm Chris Dial with the Basketball Embassy. I'm sitting in San Antonio, Texas, talking to an incredible coach sitting in Toronto, Canada. And so for our friends in Europe and Asia, for you guys that are across the pond, staying up late, welcome. I want to pass this over to Coach Mike MacKay. Coach MacKay has been an integral part of the programmatic success that Canada basketball has had, not just on the women's side, but as a whole. And Coach, I said it without everybody on, but I'd like to say it again while everybody's here. Sincerely, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us and to help promote the game in a really interesting period of time in our lives. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome to everybody. Hopefully we can share a few ideas, and anybody who knows me, I'm gonna go between how we coach and what we coach and make sure there's a balance there. And Chris has agreed that if you have questions, go through the chat, and I'm open if he wants to ask questions at any time. So I'm going to start with a movie here, and I know these movies sometimes struggle, but we'll watch it and we'll see how it turns out. It goes pretty quick at first, so we're going to look at inbounding as a play first of all, and it'll happen pretty fast.
Jornada de la fase de grupos, donde tenemos dos grupos, grupo A y grupo B. La primera jornada fue ayer 7 de junio, esta es la.
Okay, that was fast, but that's okay because we really want to watch it here. So I'm hoping everybody can see this picture, but the first one, it was exactly the same. This is the same play. And I had in the bottom on the first one, I said it was structured to structured. And this is my whole point. Are we teaching our athletes to run a pattern? Or are we teaching them to solve a problem? Well, you can see right here. Here we have our athlete with the ball. And here we have a player who is wide open. Yet there's not one player on the offense, the white, or even one player on the defense, or even the coach, or even the subs, or any in the stands that sees that there is what I would call a big advantage. And to me, when you teach through a pattern, or you teach that they're trying to repeat a pattern, you're not really helping them for the future. So this whole presentation is going to be around, we want to try to teach through what I would call solving problems and teaching them to understand advantages and disadvantages. Now, in fairness, when we judge ourselves, we always judge by our intent of our behavior. When we judge others, sometimes we only judge their behavior. I'm not judging any of these players or any of these coaches. I do not know what they were thinking or doing. I'm just using this video as a way to teach. And I think it's important that we don't judge people when we do these things, but we are just trying to use this to help teach some points. So the big advantage is that wide open basket right away. We see this. Okay. The second one, I would say, even if this player over here was not open on the block, I would say our player number 9 here, because of the position of the head here and the off balance stance, this player is much more dynamic. She could just give a little lean fake and she would have what we would call a small advantage. Neutral would be anything where there's no real advantage and we need to run an action. And I would say, actually, you can just barely see the player over here with the head. Well, there's a disadvantage if we run over there. So again, this is the concept we're going to work on. How do we start with a structure and then give players some of that creativity to play out of it? So we're starting with a foundation. And again, it's not learning a movement pattern that they can reproduce in the game. And that's the movement pattern of a shot, the movement pattern of a pass, the movement pattern of a cut, or a movement pattern of a play. What we're trying to do is, and I actually read this morning, and I'm going to use it right now, but we're not trying to have repetition without repetition, or we are trying to have repetition without repetition. We want to make sure that there's some kind of variability and instability in what we're teaching. That's what the game is like. There's going to be different spots, different types of shots, different situations, and I'm going to be fast, slow. I've been pushed a little bit. So we need to make sure that players are able to get repetitions without repetition for rote memory. And I call it structured creativity. So we want to start with a structure and then allow them the creativity to solve that problem. So we give them a situation or a starting position, and that's why I love inbounding, because we start with a starting position and then we give them a problem to solve. And then I want them to take ownership of that problem. I want them to be invested in it, and I'm not going to try to solve it for them all the time. I want them to show me and build on their prior knowledge and show me how they can solve that problem. Then we'll go back and work on it. So again, I love this idea of explore, exploit, and execute. So in the explore part, we're just going to present the activity or the drill. So we're going to talk about inbounds plays as a challenge or problem that they need to solve. I'm going to let them wobble. It's like a newborn baby. You don't see mom and dad telling them they got to have a perfect movement pattern. The baby knows the problem they got to solve. I got to get from mom, who's holding me at first and lets me go, I got to walk to dad. And there's just a lot of encouragement with a lot of feedback. And then they're going to show me what their prior knowledge is. And I'm not going to give a lot of feedback at first. I want to see how they solve the problem. In the exploit phase, that's where we're going to share solutions. We may debrief and talk about what went well, what didn't go well. And that's that analyze piece. Analyzing is comparing and contrasting. And I was listening to Chris Oliver's conversation last night, and somebody asked the question, well, what do you say when an athlete says, I don't know? Well, a lot of times when they don't know is they don't have a vocabulary sometimes to express their opinions. So when you get them to compare and contrast, you can say something, well, was that a little too fast or a little too slow? Were you a little too tight to that screen, or were you a little too loose to that screen? Were you open when you came off that screen, or were you guarded when you came off that screen? By giving them a comparison, it allows them to start to develop a vocabulary. The same thing when you get them to rank. Okay, rank that inbounds pass on a scale of 1 to 10. How do you think you did on that one? Now, at least we have somewhere where we can start to talk. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to break it down, and that's where we'll go backwards a little bit, and then I'm going to help them with maybe some more information that they need to solve the problem. One of the things I find with the small games approach is I don't have enough time sometimes to wait for them to discover every single thing I need them to do. So sometimes I have to sprinkle in some ideas to speed up the discovery process. I don't know about you, but I don't have enough time to wait for every single one of my players to discover that maybe I can go backdoor when I'm overplayed. I may introduce that to give them an idea of how to do it. And then in the execute phase is when we go into other drills or we transfer to the game. How am I tracking and monitoring to make sure that concept or that problem has actually been solved? How do I know that the approach we've taken has actually worked? So I got to have a way when we're playing in a little small-sided game to know that that's actually happening. And that's going to help me validate that what we're actually doing is working. And I think this is one we sometimes don't do enough of. We do all these drill practices and all these things, but then we never have a way to validate, did that actually take place and is it actually getting better? And that starts sometimes where you actually had to have a baseline of, well, this is what we're doing now. And then I got to know where we want to be in the future. And what are we doing that's actually getting us to that? So why do I start with inbounding? And I mean, when I start working with, say, like a 12-year-old, our learn to trains, we play a lot off inbound situations. And the reason is it starts with structure and it gives them time to think. In North America, baseball. I was a big baseball player when I was young. And what I've always loved about baseball for little kids is it's a static time when I can think. If the ball's hit to me on the ground, I'm going to throw to first base. If it goes over my head, I got to know that someone else is catching it and I got to get to my bag at second base and be ready for the throw. So I have a chance to practice my anticipation. And I think for young players, and Chris talked about this last night too, was slow learning sometimes is okay at the start. We want to give them that time to slow it down a little bit. So I really think starting with that structure is good. And especially it really emphasized what I call my big three. These are my biggest three things that I focus on when I'm coaching. One is their positioning, their vision, and anticipation of their decision. Are they in a good position to see what they need to anticipate, and then what was their actual decision? When you slow it down, they can really see what the PVAD is. Second is KYP, know your players and know your plays. I get to say, oh, that's Mike. He's good at doing this. I'm anticipating he'll do that. Oh, that's Mike. He's not very good at that. I probably gonna expect him to do this. I gotta know my teammates. There's an old Rick Majerus. Who am I? Who's guarding me? Who's my teammate? Who's guarding my teammate? That's the idea around advantage, is understanding that part of the game. And then the final thing is we have to make an actual connection, which is what we're playing as a team. We're playing together with someone. I have to connect with my eyes, with a signal, some kind of verbal connection. And we may be using it as a fake, or we may have a little subtle connections that just say, hey, just throw it up high to me. I remember we used to have one where if I was standing near the basket and the defense did not put pressure on me, it was just put my hands on my knees. And then and that just was a signal that I'm just going straight up. And then you just threw the ball straight up high because the defense wasn't going to put any pressure on them. So those little connections are important in sometimes in tricking the opponent. Second big thing is that it switches to creativity. So we start with a structure, but based on how the defense plays, we now have to be ready to be creative. And I love that element of it because it's very, very important in the game. And then this knowledge and understanding that they're gaining from learning to inbound, it will transfer very easily into when we start to play in the flow of the game. And we can build on that. Hey, remember when we did this on inbounding? This is exactly the same. So instead of teaching a whole new concept, I'm building on the prior knowledge. And that is a key thing in learning about scaffolding. Every time you teach something new and you make it brand new, they have to go back and learn everything. But if you can build on top of what they already know, our working memory and our cognitive load is reduced. And that's very, very important for players. So this is just real quick. This is, anybody's a teacher will know Bloom's taxonomy, and it's an old model and I've always liked it, but I'm going to have to give them some vocabulary. There's going to be some things, and you'll see later on, that they have to understand. Second thing is they're going to have to know the why. The why to me is just as important as the how. They need to know why we're doing what we're doing. Why would you go back door? Why would you throw it over the top? Why would you bounce it? Those things are very important. They get to apply it. After they apply it a couple of times or a number of times, now we can start to compare, contrast. We can start to rank what works better, not works better. And then from that, we hope there becomes some unique problem solves that we love to see. And that's the process that I try to use to help grow our players. The other one we want to work on, and this is this, on offense, we always want to add some deception. So are we changing speeds? Are we changing directions? And are we faking? And then on defense, we want to take away positioning, okay? We want to take away vision, and we don't allow them to anticipate. So basically, we're taking away the PVAD of the offense. So those things will be adding in as we start to grow and build this. Now, videos are sometimes tough. I'm hoping you can see this in slow motion. This is actually going to freeze it and just show a couple pictures. Then we'll show the clip. So we can start here, and right away you can see that here's the inbounder. We can see that this player is starting to put her vision more on the receivers. This is one of the big advantages that defense has in inbounding. It actually is 5 versus 4 because she cannot score in this situation and she cannot move in this situation. So there is always an advantage for the defense in numbers. And where a lot of teams are getting tricky is exactly what she's going to do. So in this second picture, you can see that they were trying to make just a quick pass to this player, but she jumped out and switched out and helped on her. And that really forced the offense now, that wasn't expected. So now they had to make an emergency correction and the pass came in. Now, here was a great counter. And I actually know the people who work with the Mystics and I talked to them, and that really wasn't a design play. This was a reaction by the inbounder and realized the basket was unprotected, and I call that a go. And she just made a cut to the basket. Now, we'll show the video, and I hope it comes out, but sometimes they're a little choppy.
But I love the resiliency to stay with it, defend, and not give up an easy 2. Make the Mystics earn it here. Atkins. Inside the cloud. But I love the resiliency to stay with it, defend, and not give up an easy 2.
So that's what we're hoping for, is that there was some disruption by the defense. They jumped out and did something that the offense didn't expect. but then the offense counter with that creativity or deception. And that's what we love, is that solving the problem with some creativity. Now this next clip is Nigeria, and I think Nigeria in the last couple years has made huge strides in women's basketball, and a lot of it is because of the pressure they put on people, and they are creating a lot of disruption on defense. And in fact, they're doing it here against Serbia, who I would say Serbia won a bronze medal in 2016. And again, it was Serbia's disruptive defense that caused a lot of problems for people. So this is a really good clip. And again, we'll do it in slow motion here first. So you can see that the first they start, and there's a typical screen to get open, but it wasn't a great screen. And then these two Nigerian girls who were face guarding or top blocking just fought through and took everything away. Well, the classic counter from offense is we're going to now bring cutters. Well, they just denied like crazy these cutters. And then they get a tip and the ball gets stolen. And it was very, very disruptive. So let's see if we can watch the clip here.
Loptu do kraja utakmice. Ali mora izvesti. Kako je ovo bilo loše izvedeno, da vidimo pokušaj.
And we found that you only need a couple of those a game. You don't have to do this on every possession, but you do it at the right time and get a couple of steals like that a game, it can really, really influence the outcome of a game. Okay, here's Serbia turning the favor on someone else. So we can again see face guarding, top blocking, the intended receiver. The inbounder was saying, whoa, I should be able to just make that pass. She gets denied. Now she has to look for the secondary person over here. Ball comes in, and you can see this is the girl back here guarding the inbounder. And now they get tremendous ball pressure. They take away the immediate pass, and they force this person to now dribble to her left. And in forced left defense, it's sometimes not the dribble left, it's the pass with the left hand. And you can see that this player gets caught in a situation. Now she's already picked it up, and she's going to her left, and she now has to make a left-handed pass against pressure. And it, here's the ball way up here, and you can see who's probably going to get that pass. So let's watch this one and see. So those are the type of things we're going to be looking at. And I'm going to now switch screens here, escape. I'm going to go to my JustSoft because I think it'll be easier for me to show this through JustSoft. Is everybody now seeing this JustSoft? And it says teaching deception, disruption. I hope that's what we're seeing.
Coach, we still have the last clip.
Okay, so I'm going to switch over here, and hopefully this will come up. Teaching deception and disruption.
Yes, sir.
Awesome.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. I find this will be a lot easier than trying to go through old videos that could stop and freeze on you. So here we are, starting off 2-on-1. And this is exactly how I do it with young children, older players. And again, I present it as a challenge. We say, okay, 5 is inbounding the ball, 1's on offense, 1 red's on defense. Your job is to get the ball inbounds, and you got to go score at the other end. And that's what that area, you're scoring at the other end. And what I'm watching for is the positioning that they choose, the vision, what they're anticipating. Do they know each other? And are they doing anything? And I'm not giving any feedback. I'm just watching this take place. And we're going to just do that. We're probably doing it at a number of baskets, cross court. I'd probably, in my gym, I'd go cross court so I could get a lot of reps going. Okay, so then the exploit thing, so we've done it a few times. Now we're going to start to analyze and rank. And one of the ways I find with young players, I start to talk about, well, what makes it dirty? And what do you want to avoid? And then what made it clean? And we start to compare and contrast. And then we can say, was that a dirty pass to get it inbounds, or was that a clean pass? And now we start to have a language, and they start to be able to learn what we're trying to do. So we would say things like, oh, when we go to the corners, that's dirty. But when we catch it more in the middle of the floor, that's clean. So I want you to go back, and now here's our new problem, is try to avoid dirty and try to catch it clean. So we hope that they start to avoid that, where they went and caught it. And I never understand why guards love to cut the corners to catch a pass against pressure, but they do, and we have to help them. So now we've given them, you don't want that. That's what you want to avoid. That's dirty. So we hope they learn something like, oh, I want to enlarge the space. That's a concept we want them to learn. I need to enlarge the space to where I actually want to catch the ball. So now when I catch, I'll catch it in that clean area, what's good. And again, they may not get this concept, so we may have introduced this concept to them as an option. Here's something you may want to think about. But if one of the players figured that out, we would use that example to show. So that's how we would start to load in some new information. Another way that somebody else may have solved it was they would say, well, why do I have to start there? Why don't I start in a dirty spot or away from where I want to go? And now maybe I can curl or circle cut that, so I'm catching it more dynamic in the place I want to catch the ball. So again, if they discovered it, we would use that. If they didn't, well, we would introduce it to them. But now they've got some new solutions to the problem that they can play with. The next piece that would probably happen is, now we're going to give the defense a new problem. We say, defense, you can't be letting them catch that ball in those spots. You got to come up with another way to defend this. You got to figure this out. So they may say, well, I'm going to top block. I'm going to face guard. And I've seen situations where players don't know what to do against this, because at younger ages, they don't know sometimes that they can throw over the top. And you may go a whole long time with a 12-year-old and they'll never throw, because they've always thought open means I see the chest of the person I'm passing to. You cannot assume that somewhere they thought that I can throw over the top, and you may have to introduce it. So now, again, we've enlarged the space and we're going to practice throwing over the top. But there's a whole element of, when do you release your seal? How should I make that pass? Should I make it bounce first? So there's a lot of good things that they're going to learn from this. So those are the things we want to do. Now, this whole idea of repetition without repetition, we don't want to do it from the same spot all the time. We want to be mixing it up. Now, I should have also had, it was different players inbounding and playing defense. So I don't want it to be the same people all the time. But we're going to get lots of repetition, but not from the same spot all the time. We're going to mix it up, different spots, different people, and that's how they're going to learn this variability and instability. And we're going to learn a lot about each other and what we can do. Okay, so I'm just going to switch to my second one here. So now this is where we start. Whoops, no, I'm sorry, my mistake. We're going to go back here. I missed a part. I'll do it this way. Just give me a second.
Hey, Coach, as you're queuing that up, we had a quick question that I think would be a good time to insert. So you mentioned the repetition without repetition, and
yes,
do you see, Coach, a certain development in our viewers right now? We've got everything from people coaching professional adults to people that are developing youth. Do you see any differentiation in when that should be introduced into a program?
I think it should start the first day they walk in the gym. You want to have repetition without repetition. The game is variable. The game is unstable. The game is random. And that's how we should be teaching it. And this idea, like I said, that there's a perfect shot form or a perfect passing form is, I think, one of the problems that we have in coaching, that we think that we have to have this perfect form before we can actually do the skill in a game-like situation. I would argue is find out what they already know and build around that. So I'm not against working on shot form, but I would never stand in one spot and shoot from the same spot for 10, 15 times in a row. I want them to move and learn how to get themselves set up. In every new spot, there's new information they have to take in. So, and I would say the same thing when you move up to the pro level or the highest level, our national teams, is they need to understand how concepts work in different situations. So differences, there's cultural differences that you and I were talking about earlier, Chris, and there's also sometimes with pros, especially, they have their own routines, and you got to respect that. You got to respect that they have some routines, that this is what they've learned for them. And I'm not going to argue with them or say that it's wrong, because for them, it's not wrong. But if we're teaching something that's new to our team, I think you want to use what's considered best for teaching purposes. Okay.
Thanks a lot, Coach. No, that's great.
Okay, so, oh, I did it again. A second here. Get to the wrong thing. There. So this is important, is learning when to release on the seal. So we talk a lot about when the ball bounces or what's out on its downward arc, that's when this player wants to release their seal. So we would probably work on some of that. And now we have more of a control. Now they're not attacking. We talk a lot about, can you be in control to get the ball in bounds? Are you trying to attack? So there's another thing they can compare and contrast. Were you trying to attack on that inbounds, or were you trying to just play control? So it allows them to start to understand the difference. So attack is maybe they're going to fake, get the overplay, and then they got the back door, which was, again, being deceptive. And of course, the passer would have to work on making a good pass too. So adding disruption, we want to try to encourage this player, hey, can you make a steal on the ball? So can you sneak and bluff like you're not involved, and then make a quick attack through the front? And then what I'm finding now, this is the one that really players are getting good at, is this, when they get sealed, is they go behind, because a lot of times this person's sealing, the ball gets passed out here, and it's got a clean path, and they can just go behind to steal the ball. And I saw Isla Iben for Turkey do 2 times in a row late in the game against the guard, just seal and get the ball. She did one in the front, then she did the next one in the back. In fact, and then about 2 plays later, she did one when the girl caught it. She always turned over her left shoulder. She did off the steal off the dribble, and it turned the game around. And it was just all off of basically seal inbounds pass. And she just saved it for the right time in the game. And I always remembered that as being very disruptive and just changed the game. Okay. And again, as always, we've got to work then in the front court. And again, we're going to be random. We're going to mix up the spots. You can see this time they weren't going to be tight to them. They're going to play off. So again, we're giving them different problems to solve, different repetitions without the same place all the time. Again, same thing on the baseline. Mix up what you do, and they will learn so much, and then you have your debrief. And this is the biggest one in Canada. Like after last year, we play this one all the time. The girls always want to play Kawhi. So we put 4.2 seconds on the clock. We start with Kawhi right here. He busts to get the ball, and he's got 4.2 seconds. And for some reason, they all seem to love to dribble over here and try to shoot the ball. But we've never been able to get that many bounces to go in. But we'll take the one that did happen. But just that idea of putting some time and score into those inbound situations is a lot of fun for the players. So now they have to start. It's a new problem, right? It's, do I have to play with attack or control? I don't have a lot of time. I got to play attack off this inbounds. Oh, I got lots of time to play control. So it really adds another element to the problem solving. Now, 2-on-2, we don't play a lot out of 2-on-2, but I use it to introduce some new knowledge. And what I want to do is now introduce some language that we can use to help the defense to be more disruptive and create more problems for the offense. So the first one is catcher, and I use this as an old baseball, and I'm sorry if culturally you're in your country, you don't play baseball. And I've been looking for another analogy, and I've never found one that works as good. And I got a friend in Sefu Bernard who challenges me all the time, but I keep telling him, when you come up with a better analogy, I'll switch. So for now, and if anybody has a better analogy, I'd love to hear it. But we consider this is home plate, and when you're right up on the ball as a defender, that's catcher. So your job is to make it tough for them to inbound it, like we saw with that Nigerian clip. And ideally, if they pass to a corner and you can get there to trap it in 2 steps, go trap it. The job on the inbounder, nothing long and nothing in the middle, allow them to cut to the corner. Where you get in trouble here is when this person tries to overplay and they allow the back cut. Make them cut to that corner, we're fine. And ideally, if they have a weak inbounder, which a lot of teams used to do, would also use their 5-playered inbound, we would trap and then make them throw it back to the non-ball handler. So a catcher is a very common one way to defend. Okay. The weakness of a catcher is there's no goalie. There's no one protecting the basket if everybody else was up. So we offensively want them to learn that anytime you see a catcher situation, can we throw over the top? And I used to call it just the wink, wink, with just a little head nod, wink, wink. That means we're going to fake like we're cutting to the ball, and then we're going long over the top. And I found in girls basketball and young players, we needed to be able to do that at a distance that they could throw that pass. If I did my inbounds way out here, I didn't have many players who could throw it that long. So this may be something that changes as you get older and as players get better at able to have their skills. But to me, the concept stays the same. It's just the strength of the pass and how far they can throw the ball is very important to know. Okay, the second one we go to is shortstop. So if they have one ball handler, the person guarding the inbound now is going to turn and face guard or top block that passer or the receiver. And I always say, look, anytime that there's an inbounds in the backcourt and they don't bring anybody else back, hey, go shortstop and double that person right away. And you may get a 5 count and may make it tough for them to catch the ball. The weakness in a shortstop is, and you can only, of course, do this on a made basket, is there's no one guarding the inbounder. So you're vulnerable to things where a ball can be inbounded quickly and that inbounder can quickly cut. Okay, so we just want to make sure that they're learning these different. The third one is either left field or right field. They're both the same as left field because on the left side, but now we put the person guarding the inbounder behind the primary receiver. And the main job here is to just be a shadow or a trapper if this person tries to go too fast. And I would say that 99% of the time when we would start a game, that's how I would have my team play until we saw who was inbounding, how good was this person, what did they want to do. We weren't going to let this person catch and go fast. If they did, we could trap them, slow them down with a shadow. If they didn't, we were fine too. It slowed them down, took them out of any fast advantages. So it's a nice, more of a conservative way to play. But if they try to go too fast out of control, and as long as that player trails, you can put 2 on the ball. And then the final one is more what we would call, oops, and the weakness of this one is, again, is you're vulnerable to the boomerang pass. So a quick pass back is always open. And so a lot of people would put a better ball handler there and they see that and they just quickly boomerang it back to the inbounder. The last one is when you're really trying to get a 5-second count. And this is when your player guarding the inbounder may not be the better athlete. So you face guard the person who's guarding the ball, and now you put your center fielder here, takes away the long pass. And again, it's a great way. We saw Nigeria players were doing this a little bit where they were doing that. Okay, so we're going to face guard. And again, the weakness on this one is there's not a lot of ball pressure. And because there's no ball pressure, the ability to find someone else to pass to can be open, because it's hard for a center fielder to guard something like a 4 across where there's all 4 people are being face guard. So you're not putting any ball pressure. It allows them to sometimes find the open person a little easier. But again, at the right time, it can cause some problems. Okay, so I'm just going to jump ahead now to just some 3-on-3 and 4-on-4. Were there any other questions, Chris? This would be a good time.
Coach, and yeah, as you're setting this up, one of the coaches was asking, you had mentioned that you don't do a ton of 2-on-2. The question was just about what, is there a specific reason that you don't?
Yeah, and this will show exactly why, because
okay.
I think in inbounding, 2-on-2 is an unrealistic, because it's when you put that third person in against some of those catchers, shortstops, left field, right field, or center field, it makes it more realistic, and the coverages that your players have to play. That's why. We play 2-on-2, but not from inbounding situations. And this is the reason why, because you're going to see more realistic. So first of all, because when you go to 3 now, you've got 2. So now you're going to have to work on defending some screening action, right? So how are you going to handle screens? Are you going to switch them? Are you going to play off a certain way? So you have to handle screens, okay? This is the other reason I like 3-on-3 is we get to work on, and I'll run that back, we get to work on this concept of chase the pass or chase the dribble. And again, teams that put a player here who doesn't like to hustle, doesn't like to get down the floor, not a good ball handler, this is where you can get some easy traps and things. And it's not a press so much as it's a situation that your players read. And there's a chase the dribble, where we have our trapper, we had our director, and we have an interceptor. And if they throw back to this person, it doesn't hurt us. So we really can work on some of those disruptive defensive concepts. It's tough to do that when you just have 2, right? But when you put the third person in, because now you have this this role of this interceptor. So that's why we use more 3-on-3 or 4-on-4. The other thing I want you to understand, this is why I like teaching from inbounding, and this is this scaffolding or building on prior knowledge. If you picture that number 3 just got a defensive rebound, and now this number 3 was jamming, we are really in a catcher situation on a missed basket. And now when we want to start to transfer this into playing with a chase the pass or chase the dribble, they've already worked on this from a static situation, and now it's, oh, that's just like, oh yeah, I understand. So now we're able to transfer into the live game, and that's why, again, one of the reasons I like to do it from inbounding. I get to teach it in a slow situation, concepts that we now can start to apply in the live situation. So they can work on, here's a chase the pass. And again, we might be able to get a trap, this player especially not getting back down the floor. Okay. The other thing we have to work on defending, we may have to work on defending stacks, is what you'll see a lot. And here you see the classic stack the 2 guards, and I'll give you my bias. If you're stacking 2 guards and you're allowing 2 guards to defend that, they're just going to switch it. I think you got to put a mismatch in there, but that's just mine. We'll talk about that later. But here's where they're playing a right field. So they're not up because they know they're up as catcher, no goalie. So here they're taking away anybody coming quick to the ball. So the right fielder is a good way to play against these sorts of things to slow it down. Okay. If they go to a shortstop, this is again why I like the 3 people. If these 2 players back at half were not involved, that can be tough, and you can get a 5-second count. But when you allow the 3rd player, you're now working on what we call that go move, which is whenever we see a shortstop, we know someone must bust to the ball for a go. And a go is just a quick cut, and now we've got the inbounder is attacking. We should have a 2-on-1. And we noticed here that they enlarge the space. When you're being played in shortstop, take them further away. Make the space bigger. And then if you have to bust later, you can still split through it. But don't start going at the ball. Make the space bigger. Draw those 2 defenders away to allow the go move. So there's where they're working on those kind of solutions. Okay. The other thing you have to practice at defending are what we call these cycle actions. And we saw that. So when the first player cuts, and then another player fills the spot somebody just let. So you've got to practice against those cycling actions. And again, those are things that will happen in any game, that back cut fill. So it's the same sort of thing that they would have to be able to defend. Here's again the classic stack of 2 guards. 2 guards face guarded. They go a modified center field. And here's our center field. But the people back here don't really get involved. And I see this happen all the time against teams. These 2 split and go to the corners, and then they expect that this person's going to cut and get it, and then the center fielder just turns and takes it away. And it's a really tough thing. And now your passes are coming in tough situations, and you have to learn how to handle those things. So we work a lot on those kind of, here's the classic things that people do. How can we disrupt them? And now the offense then has to figure out how to solve the problem, how to attack them. So here we have 4 players in, and this is one of the concepts that a lot of good teams do. And this is where there's a difference sometimes between men's elite basketball and I would say women's basketball and youth male basketball or youth basketball. I always want to bring people back into this situation. In elite men, very rarely will you see all these players come back. I don't say you have to, but for me, especially if I'm attacking teams that have an advantage on me, I wanted to create some of these isolation situations of who I wanted to isolate. I always knew there was at least 1 or 2 people on the other team out there that didn't want to play full court defense. And if I could get my player in that situation and create an open basket or a 1-on-1, I wanted that advantage. But if I always played control, where I just inbounded with a controlled inbounds and brought it up, I wasn't punishing the other team for pressuring me, and I wasn't creating enough offense out of that type of defense. I wanted to be able to score against pressure. I want to attack it, and I wanted that mindset for my players. So we would try to look for things. So again, if we saw a catcher, we may isolate a good 1-on-1 player against a weaker player, and we're going to go right to that isolation. and now we're attacking. If we force them into this where they put a left fielder, sits back here and takes that away, well, now we know we've created, one of these players can just bust to the ball, or we can set some kind of screen, and now we're into control. But we force them to back off on their pressure. So we're now in control of the situation a little more than they are. Okay, same thing in the front court. This is that whole thing. I'm not teaching them a play. I'm teaching them to solve a problem. So the first thing we always wanted was to look at our isolations. Do we have an advantage right down here in the post? And if we have, we're going right in. We're forgetting any play we run, we're going right to that pass. So we want to look for that. If they end up fronting, well, we know they're probably going to have help. Now, again, solve the problem. Somebody's got to be, they're doubled. That means you're a go person. You got to cut to the pass. And now maybe we can go high-low. And that's not an inbounds play. That's the players learning to solve the problem. So we want to create those situations where they can do that. Okay. If we force the left field, if we set them down and they're going to sit right on top, well, now it's the same sort of thing. If we can get a quick inbounds pass here and look for a boomerang. So this is, again, if we force that, can you go right back to the boomerang? And now you have your three, or you got the closeout. So again, those are just simple reads that we wanted them to be looking for. You also, when we put form, we can practice some of our zone concepts. So the classic stack, you know, I'm sure everybody just work on practicing against the zone. So we can practice our stack option. I love this option when we can work on spacing on the weak side for the three, cheat behind the zone. If the bottom player cheats out, we can attack with the cut. If they drop to take that, we can look to pass into the seal and then fill for the shot. So they're learning again just how to attack and be disruptive, and the defense is trying to be disruptive and the offense is trying to be deceptive. So again, they're learning those concepts. So one last little thing here, and this is what I did with youth players. We played the same inbounds formation in all spots on the floor. And we started with what I call this plus, because it was like a plus sign. And the first thing we taught them was, again, if there's no catch, if it's a catcher, we want to look to throw long. And we can throw long to any of these players. So we could go long to our side players with just that little fake, and we can throw over the top. Okay. We could also set a screen where one could screen for 5. So we're getting a mismatch screen, and now we can have 5 go over the top. Or we could have over here do the same thing. So we're always looking for ways we could attack going over the top. And basically what would happen is they would have to get into a right field or something. They had to get somebody back as a goalie. This now made it much easier for us to get the ball where we want it. And to me, I always wanted a screen that would put their weakest ball defender, who's usually this player right here, it doesn't have to be 5, on if they switch onto my best ball handler. To me, was get the ball in the middle of the floor to your best ball handler. So we would try to make sure that it was, if they want to switch, it's their worst defender going to end up guarding my best player. And usually they would end up just getting out of that sort of stuff. Same thing here was our plus. You can see the same situation. 5 could screen for 1, 2 and 3 are isolated. So we have the same situation. We can go long, we can isolate. So again, they're learning to figure out how to solve those problems. And there's just a screen to go long. Same thing in the front court. We looked for our isolation. We had some screening action here. But this is where that in that exploit, I would allow the players, we would have after our games, we would talk about, well, what did we learn? What were some things? Let's compare and contrast. And they would start to invent plays based on what they saw. And one of the ones they came up with in the front court, which I thought was really good, was this little back screen by 1 for 3, and we threw the lob. And they called that a rack. They took the name of the girl, whose name was Carrie, and they just said it backwards. So people thought we were calling out a country. Well, actually, it was just a cue, because that's important, your connections, right? They would come up with a way to connect, so they'd just call plus a rack, and no one else knew what it was. On the baseline, same sort of thing. We set up our plus, And then the only thing was, the girls came up with this on their own. They said, well, why not put 5 at the back and 1 at the front? Because now if there's a screen, 5's better at the rim. And that was, again, they built the scaffold. They had prior knowledge of what plus was, but they were able to see how this solved a problem better. And it was really, really good to see those sorts of things. So they just switched it. And now there was a little screen and the screener classic, but they were able to come up with ways to do that. This was one of my all-time favorites. We had a girl named Sabrina. That was this player right here. And she said, when my girl plays parallel to me, if I just screen my own, and we call it a scrone, screen your own, this player can use us as a double screen. And I thought it was brilliant, because what was happening was, if she would screen, they'd just switch all the time. But she said, if I just screen my own, it's a double screen. So she would just screen her own player, and now this back player just played off this. She could either cut here or cut here based on what she saw. And I just thought that was the most brilliant thing I've ever learned. It wasn't my idea. It was them creating and solving a problem. So we just called it, it's a SAB from now on. It's always been a SAB, and it's both screening your own.
Hey, Coach.
Yes.
In the spirit of this, what you're talking about,
Yep.
one of the participants is, if you could allude to why, because this is great, but what are some advantages that you've seen of giving players like this some ownership of their own practice, of their own situation?
First of all, they're smarter than me. Like 5 brains are better than 1. And they're out there playing. And now remember, it's context, but they know how the defense is defending them in an inbound situation. And so when we come off at a halftime or something, I can ask them, how are they guarding you? And I can pretend that I see everything. I can pretend that, but I guarantee you, I never saw that defender was playing parallel to her. I would have watched tape, I would have stood there, but I never put my eye on that because I wasn't focusing enough detail on that. But because that was her, she was able to clearly define and describe exactly how she was being defended. And because she could see the problems, it allowed her to take ownership. And I guarantee you that the players have never forgotten that play, and still to the day are still playing. They know what a SAB is because it was theirs. So to me, I'm not saying they're designing everything, but for them to take that ownership and to be challenged to think, that's me becoming a transformational coach. That's me changing them from just being a player who's remembering a memory of a play that I've designed into something that they take ownership for. And I can't emphasize that enough, how important that is. The last little thing here, then we'll go to some questions, is this was also how, when I started, we basically played penetrate and kick, pass, cut, dominoes, whatever the term is. But when we were slowed down, we would use plus as our trigger or our set. So we just built on what we already had. We didn't have to add anything new. We didn't have to have a new play. We only had one play, which was plus. But because they took ownership of it, they could, again, after every game, we could say, well, what did we learn about when we ran plus? Well, this didn't work and that didn't work, and could we do? And they would come up with, and I would just help them how we could build into our lessons learned from that and to keep growing our system. So to me, when you're working with young players, that was very important because the cognitive load was reduced, but their taking ownership and learning was magnified because they always saw it as it's a problem and we got to find solutions instead of I got to remember a play. And if there's one message I'm going to try to give, that's the one. Don't try to get them to memorize plays. Give them problems that they got to solve the solution. So I'm going to stop there. And I think we've got some time for some questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Coach. Yeah, that was great stuff. Wanted to ask, we had some commentary in some of the other panels as well, actually, but trying to identify differentiations between coaching men and coaching women, coaching boys and coaching girls. The reality is that even if you had a gym full of 100 youth females, there's going to be a ton of variation in
Mhm.
and then when you add in this, this dynamic, this gender dynamic, you're going to get even more. What are just some, if you could think of some kind of broad stroke nuggets for those coaches listening that are in clubs or that are in settings to where they've got to transition from a gym full of guys, to a gym full of gals, maybe in the same day. Are there any things that have helped you cognizantly to be more effective in those spaces?
Oh, yes. Now, people say to me all the time, well, Mike, you never coach girl or boys. I go, well, I coached 60 guys in football. So I used to be a head football coach for 20 some years. So I understood, and I would walk off the football field in October and walk immediately into a female basketball practice. And I had to know the difference. Now, I'm going to generalize, but I do think there are some qualities that are important. Number one for me was when I coach my female players, I had to give them time at the start of the practice to connect with each other. They had to check in to see how everybody was doing. And if I didn't do that, it was going to hurt my practice. So I did not worry too much about at the start. If they're over there talking to somebody and they're talking, that's okay. Get that over with, and now we'll have a great practice. With guys, they want to be out there dunking right away. They want it to be in there. When are we going to play? When are we going? They didn't need that, but the girls needed that, and that was important. And if you don't do it, it's going to impact you. The second one I'd say was I found the girls needed to know why. And telling them, you're doing it because I told you so, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. With guys, sometimes it's biology. And I would say it's like you had to be the biggest ram on the hill. You want to butt heads with me? Well, you're going to lose because I'm the bigger ram. And you're going to do it because I told you to do it. Now just get over there and start doing it. And guys accept that because that's a guy. But that doesn't work with the girls, and it shouldn't work. And again, I'm generalizing. Okay. And then the other one with the girls is this whole idea of competing. I really take exception that people say that girls don't compete. I just think you have to understand they're going to compete a little different than what we think the guys are going to do. And you really have to understand what compete is going to look with, and you have to define it a little more. And that's, again, a lot of, it's just culturally, it's just different. Like I know one of the big things with our Canadian girls is they're not afraid to be physical on defense. But I've had people from around the world say, how do you get your girls to do that? And I go, I don't have to do it. They just do it because they're okay with that. But I know from other countries, they're not. So there are some cultural differences that are very important. Like a lot of the stuff that I teach may not work in other cultures because there's just different acceptances. But I know I'm coaching for the Canadian culture. And you and I talked earlier about diversity is important. The female voice is very important. So I'm hoping that my job becomes redundant as far as I'm the last male that does my job. Right. So I think there's that leadership needs to be there on the female side.
Those are great points, Coach. I think, in these settings too, especially now with the circumstances we're dealing with, just anything that provokes a thought, anything that challenges us to take a different vantage point. So to your point, you mentioned, hey, you're in Canada, you're coaching, a culture that has, identifiable characteristics, and that would be different than, if we were talking earlier, if you were in Serbia or if you were coaching in China. Right. Now that said, we have a list, we have an audience here representing all those countries. What would you tell a young coach or inexperienced coach in terms of what the value of some of this is, regardless of whether it's immediately, usable by them?
Well, I think you ultimately have to be able to look, and you can't be held hostage by your culture either. I tweeted something out today about one of the great fears that I have is that we think we got it right, but yet we're impacting the next generation because we actually had it wrong. because the game is constantly growing and changing. And I think that's what's happening with, I mean, I started coaching when there was no shot clock, right? It was IABO rules. So I understand a lot of changes that we went through. I understood when we first started coaching, we were coaching with it was probably a size 4 ball. It was an old Macassa, terrible thing for girls. And I was the coach in the Nova Scotia who promoted we should be using the boys' ball because the girls' ball was so terrible. And then I was the first coach who was promoting, well, we should have a size 6 ball because it's smaller, but it was a better ball. So I mean, there's been changes, and I think you have to be able to look at, even though it's cultural, is it growing with the game? And you and I talked earlier about, well, what are you going to keep and what are you going to change? And I think this is a great time for coaches to be able to reflect. And I use that analogy of like sitting on my wall up here pretend there's a big mailbox like in a post office, the old post office. And I'm constantly sorting things into those slots like, okay, offense, defense. Well, then all of a sudden something come up called fast break. I don't have a box for that. I need to put a new box up there, fast break. Oh, there's a new box I just heard, triggers. I don't even have a box for that. I got to put a box up, triggers. Do I like that box or don't I like that box? And then, oh, here's something that goes in there. Should that go in that box? Should I keep my old stuff? So you're constantly reflecting and building your repertoire, your knowledge of the game. And this is a perfect time to go through that. And I think that's the challenge. Instead of when you get into the season, you get into that grind of the season, you're dealing with players and you're dealing with fundraising, you're dealing with travel, you're dealing with all those things. And sometimes our professional development, and we get it's easy just to do what I've always done. And we owe it to our players to grow and improve just as much as they do. And I think through that self-reflection and these type of clinics is the best way to do that.
I agree. Coach, I think we got time maybe for one more. And you're getting some folks in the Q&A saying thank you and that they've enjoyed this one. One
Good.
guy from Winnipeg, I'm giving him a shout out, Roger from Winnipeg, because he's up in your neighborhood. But hey, this one's actually for me, Coach. What you being a teacher first, Coach. During this time, are there any things you could throw out to these coaches, to myself, in terms of is there a book that you would recommend right now? I know there's probably several you were mentioning going through. Is there somebody that maybe you follow on social media that you feel like you get some good nuggets from, or if there's a coach that we could find on one of these platforms that you would say is like a don't miss? Are there any of those things you comment on?
Well, there's a lot of people that have, and it depends, I think, on what you're looking for. I mean, I really enjoy Ross McMains and Zico right now, Cornell, because I think they're on the cutting edge with how is the game going to be played in the future. They're thinking not just now, they're thinking about the future. And I think on that technical, tactical, they're doing some pretty interesting stuff. And I also love the fact that they've given a vocabulary to terms. And I get people telling me all the time, well, Mike, you have too many words for things. I said, well, if you're an expert at something, you need a very detailed vocabulary to describe that, because you cannot make mistakes on details. So if I have a doctor who's operating on me, I'd want that person to have a pretty detailed vocabulary so they know the difference between the artery and the vein. I don't want them just saying, oh, it just cut the blood vessel. I want them to know exactly what artery that is or vein and where it goes and what details and how long it is, and they need that. And I think as basketball coaches, when you don't have a detailed vocabulary, you can't coach on the fly. You can't coach in dead balls. You can't impact change that quickly because you don't have a way to describe it. So I love them. Alex Rama is another guy who's done a lot of good stuff around that kind of conceptual teaching of the game. I think Chris does a great job. Chris Oliver does a great job on, and like his presentation on how to teach the game and some of the stuff he did on feedback, the keep and add. I think sometimes coaches don't understand how important that is, that if you improve yourself in just your teaching management style, how much more impactful you'll be as a coach. You know, getting louder or getting up in someone's face because they don't understand. You may think that's your way to solve a problem, but it really doesn't improve performance. But that's what I still see with a lot of coaches is they haven't learned management styles of teaching, or, you know, we'd call it classroom management. They just get loud or they get up in someone's face, right? And that doesn't improve the performance. There's some good books out there. Like there's a new book out, it's called Motivational Interviewing. I think it is one of the best books I've read recently on dealing with some of these social emotional issues that you deal with and on how you empower people. It's a really, really good book. The one I showed here on the constraints-led approach, very good on understanding how teaching through game, you know, we call it small-sided games or constraints or through that's those sorts of things. I mean, I'm a good close friend with, like I say, Sefu Bernard with works with the Mystics. I think his stuff, and he came through PGC, the point guard in the States, and I think they have a great, unique vocabulary for the stuff they do. So I follow everybody, and I pick what I like. But I'm a big time reader, and if people want to direct message me, and I can share books or
what I was going to ask you,
because I have so many. If I showed you my Kindle and how many books are in my Kindle, now you can just see a few of my books here, but I've had to back down on actual hard copies because I have a small apartment here and I travel so much, so it just gets harder and harder to do with books. But my Kindle is full of all kinds of books, so it's one of the best ways I learn.
Well, Coach, thanks again. You mentioned direct message. Is that the best way for these coaches to reach out to you if they've got questions or follow-up?
Direct message me on Twitter. MacKay, MJ, Michael. And just give me time, that's all.
Yeah, for sure. MacKay, MJ, Michael. Well, Coach, listen again from our Basketball Embassy global, you know, family, friends, and all the coaches. We really, really appreciate you and appreciate your contributions to this ever-changing game and ever-changing world, man. But it means a lot. It took time to do this.
Well, thank you, and thanks again for what you're doing. I think it's great for the game.
I appreciate it, Coach. Have a great rest of your day.
Okay, bye now.
Bye-bye.